Hey there, my name's Curtis Lucas, and you're watching Empire Building. So I wanted to do a video about an issue that has been circulating around social media quite a lot and in the comments of my previous videos. People are very concerned that Merrick Okamoto, the CEO of Marathon Patent, is selling shares. This stems from an SEC filing last Friday after the market closed, indicating that Merrick Okamoto did in fact sell 700,000 shares of Marathon Patent at a price of $48.65, which just so happened to coincide with almost the near exact top that we formed last week. Lucky SOB actually timed the top. But is this something that we need to be concerned with? Very often, people always cry foul whenever an insider sells shares, especially when that insider happens to be the CEO of the company. People start to wonder, maybe he knows something we don't. And I've actually covered this in a previous video the last time Merrick Okamoto sold some of his shares. But I think it's worth revisiting again, as this time the value of those shares totaled approximately $34 million. That is a nice chunk of change, but it helps to put this into perspective. As a percentage of his total holdings, that accounted for approximately 15%, and the vast majority of those holdings were awarded to Merrick Okamoto most recently as a result of a performance bonus that was written into his employment agreement. The shares that he was awarded were a part of his compensation pay. His base salary is approximately $300,000. And in addition to that, he received several performance incentives in the form of restricted stock units, or RSUs. In this case, those stocks vested immediately, so he was free to sell those if he so chose. Now, I admit that usually when this happens, it's just not a good look. It's certainly not good PR, and I completely understand that people perceive this in a certain way. But it's worth noting that nearly all CEOs do this. At least one that I wasn't able to find any indication of him ever selling was Elon Musk. The guy never sells anything. But you don't have to dig too much further to find plenty who do. Here are a few examples. All of these examples are the dollar amounts of shares sold by relatively well-known CEOs of Fortune 500 companies who sold shares and the amount of shares that they sold in 2020 alone. Richard Branson sold $41 million worth of Virgin Galactic. The CEO of Starbucks sold $10.4 million worth of shares. The CEO of Microsoft sold $23.3 million worth of Microsoft shares. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, sold $131.7 million worth of Apple shares in the year 2020 alone. And Jeff Bezos, the former CEO of Amazon, sold $10.2 billion worth of Amazon shares in 2020. The reality is all of these CEOs sell for different reasons. It's well known that Jeff Bezos uses the proceeds of his sale of Amazon shares to fund Blue Origin, his rocket company. So who knows? Maybe if you knew the reasons why they sold, it might make people feel a little better. Or it might make people feel worse. Who knows?
What kind of hooker takes credit cards?
A rich one!
The point is, they're their shares to sell. Remember that those shares form a portion of their compensation. Usually the vast majority of their compensation. So if you look at it that way, it's kind of like expecting an employee not to cash their check when they receive it and just to sit on it. Obviously, yes, that's not exactly the same thing, but the point I'm making here is those shares make up their compensation. So if they choose to sell some, it is their prerogative. There doesn't have to be a deeper meaning to it. Now, the argument maybe could be made that his compensation might be too high in the form of the amount of shares that he's been receiving. I don't know. But speaking as someone who carries a vast majority of his portfolio in Marathon Patent shares, and we're talking well over $1 million now. How do I feel about it? Well, the reality is the decisions that Merrick Okamoto makes don't have any impact on the decisions that I myself make. The metrics by which I underwrite this company doesn't have anything to do with the decisions that Merrick Okamoto makes with his own finances. His decision to sell 15% of his holdings doesn't have any impact on what my decisions will be. And it certainly doesn't have any impact on the future performance of the company itself. But like I said, I understand he's a public figure. He's the figurehead of the company itself. And the fact that he happened to time it perfectly actually makes the optics look even worse. But good on him. He managed to get a good price for the shares he was looking to unload. But if you're feeling that his decision to unload 15% of his holdings should in any way impact your decision to sell or hold your existing shares, I think you need to take a closer look at why you purchased these shares in the first place. But here's something else you should always ask yourself with regards to any stock that you hold. What are the motivating factors that would lead you to sell? As an example, if I published a video tomorrow and announced that maybe I sold half or maybe even all of my position in Mara. I mention this because just recently there's a house that came up for sale in a neighborhood that I've wanted to move into for quite some time, and I've been keeping my eye on the real estate in this area. Now, this house might not be much to look at, but as I mentioned, it's in a very desirable area. And the list price for this house is about $500,000. Now, with the windfall that I've been able to benefit from investing in these companies, in particular for me, Mara, I'd be able to purchase this property in cash with tax-free money, which would instantly cash flow for me $2,000 a month from the existing renter already living in that house. Now, my plans would not be to move into this house immediately. What I was looking to be able to do is simply hold on to the property until I was ready to build my dream home. So the thought crossed my mind, I could buy this house right now in cash, and I would add to my monthly cash flow $2,000 a month, which would help with my monthly expenses. So on paper, this is a deal that makes a whole lot of sense. And it would certainly be hard to argue that it wouldn't be responsible to do so. Yet I can guarantee if I made an announcement like that, I'd get a lot of backlash. Now, in the end, I decided for myself that I'm not ready to exit these positions. With everything that I've seen, I don't believe we're anywhere near the top of this market. So to sell out of my early position now, to buy even something like that would make a whole lot of sense and would change the course of my life. I mean, once I've bought that house, it'd be pretty hard for someone to take it away from me. Versus the shares could certainly suffer a substantial fall. That risk exists. The odds of the value of that house suddenly dropping 50 or 60% is a whole lot less likely. And at some point, this is exactly what I will do. But for me, personally, I'm just not ready to do that. I can't necessarily say the same for Merrick Okamoto. Just make sure that your motivations for buying or selling a stock have to be your own. They should never be based on the actions or decisions of another person. Buy if it makes sense for you, sell if it makes sense for you. In the end, you only answer to yourself. No doubt the sell-off that we just witnessed at the start of this week, Monday, was in part due to this announcement. So I inevitably took this opportunity to pick up yet some more short-term call option contracts. I chose this opportunity to make a bet that, one, I don't believe this Bitcoin rally is done. And I feel that the odds that we make a new all-time high in Bitcoin within the next 2 weeks is pretty strong. But more importantly, we know that Mara is going to be accepting its single largest delivery of S19 Pro miners by Monday next week. And while this shouldn't be news to the market, over and over and over again, we've witnessed that every time a company announces the arrival and deployment of new miners, their stock price surges. I've covered this earlier. It doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense, but the reality is a lot of the people that are in these stocks now weren't exactly following along 2 months ago when all of these announcements were being made. But as with anything, there's no real guarantee, so this would still be a considerably high risk trade. For those of you who are wondering, the strike price for these calls I purchased was $60 with an expiration date of Friday, March 5th. I figured I'd give the market at least 5 days after the announcement so that the move could play out. But as I mentioned, 2 things need to happen for this to work. 1, Bitcoin's rally needs to continue. And 2, we got to hear the announcement of these miners being deployed. Obviously, there is the potential risk that maybe this delivery gets a little delayed. But there's also the possibility that they might arrive early. This is why I didn't want to wait too long to move on this. I was building into this position last week on Friday, and with the drop today, I just added into it. I know a lot of you have been anxiously awaiting my sort of crash course into purchasing options contracts, which I promise I will do very, very soon. I've been researching the process, and I managed to acquire the additional hardware that I needed in order to share screen and sort of walk through the process step by step. So I will be able to do that very soon. Just be patient. There's a few technical aspects to it that I just have to get my head wrapped around before I attempt it. That's all for this one. Now let's get back to empire building.